I know that Jane at the beginning asked how many of you had been to the SCALA. I also want to know, because I always like to know kind of what kind of an audience we've got. Are any of you filmmakers? Got any filmmakers in the room? Nope. And sort of, okay. And then my other question is, which SCALA did you go to? The Fitzrovia one, or the SCALA King's Cross one? Anyone went to Fitzrovia? Yay! Oh, wow. Me too. What was the film you saw? My first film was Bus Stop and then Eraserhead. So I'm showing my age.
In a double bill?
No. No.
So I just come down to London. I was 1980. I was 18 years old and queer, and it was just a kind of really exciting. I can't remember what I saw. It was just the place I could go and feel just. I mean, I was nothing like the other people who were there. I was way more ordinary than that. But it was nice to feel completely ordinary.
That is absolutely the
I've got that is the perfect summation of this, as you say, the SCALA experience.
And then when it moved to King's Cross, wild, completely wild. And I kind of moved with it. I was ready for that. But can I ask a question?
Well, I'm going to ask them a few questions, but I just wanted to get a sort of feel of the audience. Now, so you two, first film you saw at the SCALA? Jane.
August 1981, I went to see an all-nighter, and I can't remember what the first film of the 5 that I saw, but I do remember seeing Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue as part of it. So it was a horror.
And were you 18 years old, Jane?
Just 17.
And did anyone check your...
No,
because in those days it used to be pretty strict. I remember my mum stuffing socks in a bra so she could get me into a film she wanted to see. So they were pretty tight in those days. And what about you, Ali? What was your first film there?
I was a very young 16, and I saw a film called Birdie by Alan Parker. Not one of his more memorable films, but slightly. Yeah, I was going to say it's kind of more mainstream, but actually it is quite strange. It's kind of jolly romp about mental illness and obsession. With Nicolas Cage and Matthew Modine, about a traumatised Vietnam vet who thinks he's a pigeon. I really enjoyed it.
Okay. So I've been kind of across this film for quite a while. Jane approached me many years ago when she was doing her book and reminded me that I'd done a tiny bit of programming at the SCALA when I was a film critic at City Limits. And I waited, and the book came out, and it was absolutely amazing. And then Jane came back with, I'm making a film. And then I met Ali. And what I want to know is, when you first pitched the idea of making a documentary about the SCALA, what did you have in mind, and how did it change over the course of production? Because production's been pretty lengthy, hasn't it? It's been a good 5 years, is that right?
Yeah, we've been working on the film for 5 years since the book came out in 2018. When I was finishing off the book, of which Ali was the editor, I came across 50 minutes of archive footage that I'd never seen before, and some of it is in the film, and you'll know it because it's the very wonky film in King's Cross shot between 91 and 93, like the party on the roof at the end. And so it's a sort of 50-minute reel, and I knew about the Michael Clifford film that we see little extracts of, like the lovely sequence with Mrs. Reeve and the bit with me on the red telephone giving the programme information with short black hair, and I knew about the professional archive, the Spandau Ballet at Fitzrovia footage that had been shot by London Minorities Unit, headed up by Janet Street Porter and Danny Baker. So that's a really great programme, but I didn't know about this big bit of what we called fan footage. So I started to talk with various people about what a sort of documentary version of the book might look like and feel like. The archive was really key to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We went through a strange cul-de-sac when at one point it was going to be a sitcom. It was going to be a kind of sort of deranged, kind of surreal, psychedelic kind of sitcom. Probably much like The Young Ones, kind of meets cinema, really. And that fell through. So we went back to the drawing board and did a documentary instead.
So what do you think was the biggest challenge you had in production, apart from your tiny budget and COVID?
We got the funding, and then 1 week later, COVID. So that was, but it gave us more time to develop the film, actually, and everybody who worked on the film had another job. So Alice, a business journalist, I work in a shop. The producers, our Channel X producers, were making, their kids' TV programme mostly, and Andy Stark was making his Ben Wheatley films and various other bits and pieces. So it was okay, kind of like time went past. But I think the biggest single challenge that we had was the fact that we shot at least 50 hours of interview footage with our interviewees, and it was really, really hard getting that down to about sort of, maybe like total 20 minutes, 25 minutes of interviewees. There were so many great stories that we had to leave out. So some of those are going to be on the Blu-ray extras. But yeah, I think, what do you think, Ali? I think that for me was the hardest thing. Yeah,
it's heartbreaking when you have to let some of those things go. You got to kill those babies. But yeah, I mean, we went through a paper edit because we transcribed everyone, and we're still doing it. It takes years to do that, transcribing people. And we just sort of highlighted things that made us laugh and made us cry and made us whatever. But there are plans, I think, for a kind of hopefully an oral history, essentially, of a kind of the 80s and 90s subculture, using the SCALA as a kind of carapace or kind of peg to hang this on. I still hope, and I think we can pull it off.
I mean, I came and helped out one day, and I was very impressed because you're first-time directors, and okay. And what really struck me was the efficiency with which you were moving. I think you did 4 big interviews that day. It was Douglas Hart, Peter Strickland, Stefan, and the Kung Fu all-nighter crew. And you were ruthless and fantastically good at kind of letting them say what they wanted to say, but moving it on and sticking to time. And that really impressed me. But what's impressed me even more as someone who's made cinema documentaries is the amount of footage you have cleared and the film clips. And do people know about fair dealing? Do people know about these things? Yes, you're interested in fair dealing. Can we get Jane to talk about it? Okay.
So all of the archive footage, by which I mean, the whether it was amateur or whether it was the television archive, the people protesting. So all of that came from archives, and all of that was cleared and licensed properly. With the movie clips, we knew that we couldn't possibly make this without movie clips. We also knew that we couldn't possibly go the Moon Age Daydream multi-million budget. I mean, who's got that money to make a film about the SCALA? It was not going to happen. But what we did have was the fact that we got to a point through various program makers, including Saskia, also including people like Mark Cousins, where there is an editorial framework that's been established for fair dealing. And you'll have seen at the beginning and at the end of the film a big bit of wording which says loud and clear that we are quoting copyright law, and the right of quotation exception is really critical to what we're doing, because this is not a film, as you have seen, about movies. Unlike Mark Cousins' films, we haven't got people pontificating about the froth on the coffee, and in this film of Bergman,
froth on the coffee,
whatever it is. Sorry, Mark, that was unkind. Yeah, we do love him. That was mean. So we haven't got people talking about films, not really. But we wanted to give a sort of like a visual representation of the flavour of the SCALA programme. So we exercised our right of quotation exception. So that's what it is.
It's a really... I mean, I did a documentary for the BBC about the history of film censorship back in 1999, 100 years of film, 100 years of censorship. I had to get Clockwork Orange on a Laserdisc from France and have my consultant or whoever it was sit literally in front of it, talking us through a scene. And that was the first time the BBC did fair dealing on a film. And Kubrick rang up Alan Yentorp and said, no, you can't do this. And then Warner Brothers, in credit to Alan Yentorp, he stuck to his guns and we did show it. But then Warner Brothers withdrew all their films from the BBC for a while. And so Fair Dealing is really interesting because it's come along so much since then. I was watching your film and thinking, wow, there are things you're doing which I would never have, got away with. But I think it's brilliant.
I mean, the music rights alone almost turned me into a nervous, gibbering wreck. Music is really, really incredible. I mean, so hard to clear. And there was just this one piece of music in there, which is when Barry Adamson's version of Man with a Golden Arm is segued from the original kind of theme for the Man with a Golden Arm. That took weeks and weeks and weeks, and we're talking about like 20 seconds of music. I never want to do that again.
Yeah, I used to want to put a caption up and say, I really hope you're enjoying this bit, it's costing this much money. Yeah. So one of the things that struck me about the film, which I absolutely love, is it's really a documentary about an era and a building and a very disparate community of people rather than about film culture per se. But your main funders were the BFI, who are all about film history and movies on screen. How did that work out for you two?
Well, so the film was funded by the BFI Doc Society, which is an organisation set up to do what it says on the tin, fund documentaries. We went to them. I went to them first with the idea, and Lisa Marie Russo gets a big credit up front. She's a really interesting filmmaker herself, and she got it immediately. The next bit of money came from a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign.
Is there anyone here who helped crowdfund, by the way?
I think there's one.
Thank you very much, Saskia.
And the last bit of money came from BFI Doc Society as well, and then you get a bit of tax money that sort of finishes off the budget. BFI came in as a distributor. We had a sort of rough cut screening, and they loved it to bits. We did a couple of tweaks of that rough cut, and then we showed it to Channel 4, who loved it and bought it. So it's going to be on the telly at the end of 2024.
This is miraculous. They both bought it on the strength of a single screening. I think Channel 4, the screening was possibly held by Edgar Wright in the audience laughing his head off. It's like, yes, Edgar, laugh it off.
I think what the BFI like about it, and the BFI distribute quite a wide range of films, fiction films and documentaries about all subjects. But I think what they really like about it is that it's about the spirit of cinema going. Yeah. And the thing that's really important to the BFI is to champion the art of, the act of cinema going, in addition to the art of filmmaking.
Absolutely.
Also, it's generational. The gatekeepers of the BFI all went to the SCALA, and now they're of an age where they can let us back in. It's fantastic. So timing is everything in this.
Of all the factors that closed the SCALA, it was the Clockwork Orange case, the lease expiring, the financial crisis at Palace, the move to people watching more films on DVD and video. What do you think had the biggest impact? Or is it perfect storm? So
it was a perfect storm, but the thing that absolutely nobody can deny is that the SCALA's 12-year lease, which was taken out in 1981 when it moved from Fitzrovia to King's Cross, expired in June 1993. The difference between Fitzrovia and King's Cross was that when the SCALA was kicked out of Fitzrovia by the arrival, ironically, of Channel 4 Television, who took over the building, Stephen Woolley...
They owe us, yeah.
Stephen Woolley negotiated a £10,000 settlement. I couldn't really go into this level of detail in the documentary. If we'd had something like, a 3-1-hour, 3-part Netflix series or something like that, we would have gone into much greater detail about the kind of historical facts about how the cinema was managed and all sorts of things as well, but we couldn't, so we opted for the audience story for this particular film. But so that £10,000 enabled Stephen, Jane Pilling and co to set up in King's Cross and turn it back from a monkey house into a cinema again. When the SCALA lease ran out in 1993, Palace had gone under in 1992. Palace was a wonderful film and video distribution company and film production company, which over-diversified into many different areas, and caught up in the recession and the failure of a couple of their much bigger, more expensive films. The company was wound up in 1992. Stephen Woolley and Nick Powell were the directors of Palace Pictures. Stephen Woolley and Nick Powell were the directors of the SCALA Cinema. The SCALA tried to fundraise, like my first day at work at the SCALA in 1988, a letter landed on my desk from British Rail, and it was a notice of compulsory purchase order on the lease, because at that time the high-speed rail link was going to come right through the middle of King's Cross, right through the middle of our building, across the train lines, and it wasn't until several years later that the route was rerouted around the back of St Pancras. So we always knew that this was on the cards. So throughout my time at the SCALA, as well as programming films, we were working on plans to redevelop the building to make it more financially profitable by multiplexing it. So we worked with some architects called Beryl Foley, who did, I think, the Metro Cinema and various others. And it was, the plans were quite nice, but we couldn't fundraise, and because of the climate. And then when Steve and Nick officially kind of went back, they didn't exactly go bankrupt, but they lost everything. And we really couldn't fundraise at that point. Plus the fact they were really out of energy. Yeah. At the beginning, Stephen Woolley was an absolute firecracker. But by the end, he really, really couldn't bear it anymore. And he didn't want to see the SCALA lose any more money, so they basically wound the company up when the lease ran out in June '93. So I know that's interesting, but I think you can see it's also a bit too much information for the film.
Yeah, I mean, it was great that day I spent filming with you guys. It was the first time I'd been in the SCALA since I made the documentary about Palace, when I'd interviewed Nick and Steve in '93, depressed as all hell, sitting in that building with the rumble, except because I was making it for the BBC, we had to stop when the rumble happened. Like, we had to cover all our cuts. When I first saw this film, I kept looking at it thinking, they've got jump cuts and they're not having to cover them with clips. And so I loved the kind of anarchy of the style of the film. I think it's really great. One of the things I wanted to really ask was, what do you think, this is my final question, I'm going to let you all ask questions, what do you think the SCALA's legacy was? Do you think this film will inspire people to run cinemas in a more interesting way? Because we've been, art houses, apart from the Garden, which is unique and wonderful, most art house cinemas now are just basically, they're like pret-a-manger to a, spirited independent sandwich maker, and they're all the same, and they all show the same movies. And it just struck me watching this, just the extraordinary number of films you guys had going there. And do you hope that people will watch this and think, right, I'll start a cinema? Or
yeah, it's a massive call to action, this film. It's not some, hopefully, I hope you don't take away from it a kind of dewy-eyed nostalgia trip. It is a massive call to action to do that. We have two sets of people by a significant metric who come up to us after screenings. One group are typically young women under 25 who come up and say they've been massively inspired by what they've seen, possibly because they've seen a rota of extremely forceful, force of nature young women on the screen as programmers doing this stuff, including Jane, who say at the very least they want to set up their own film club, more permanently go into exhibition distribution. I cannot tell you how happy that makes us. We have another group as well.
And our other group is gentlemen of a certain age who come up very pink-eyed. We had a lovely guy in Manchester when we showed the film up there, who came up and his lips were trembling and his eyes were just full of tears. And he explained to me that the moment at which he'd lost it was, he said, I kept it together. And then when I saw the image of the fundraising T-shirt, the Droog in the Dock T-shirt that we sold at the end, he said, I had that T-shirt. I've worn it for the last 30 years. and I just had to throw it away because it was in shreds, and he started crying again, and I think it kind of represented to him, you know, it's a very melancholic film, as you can see, as well as the sort of, you know, fun and games and silliness. Yeah.
No, I was incredibly nostalgic the first time I saw it. I was just like that. It felt a bit like seeing Colonel Blimp, you know, when he wants to be a young man again, and you go back in time. I had that kind of like, oh, I really want to be 17 and sneaking into films that I wasn't allowed to go into. Anyway, questions. That lady back there, thank you.
Thanks. John Waters mentioned print and flyers and ephemera and things like that. Is there an archive of that material?
Yes, when the SCALA closed, I'd actually left the SCALA in 92, but I went back in 93 to help with the sort of, you know, Save the SCALA campaign. And then when we couldn't save the SCALA, Helen DeWitt, who was the last programmer, and myself kept almost everything in terms of like box office records, distribution catalogues, and the programmes that we had kept throughout the life of the SCALA in order to sort of refer back to, you know, previous bits of programming. So we had that's the SCALA archive, and the reason why we kept all of that stuff was we thought that we would try and open the SCALA again, but the fact was we didn't have any financial backing, as I explained, and we weren't as skilled as Stephen Woolley was, and also everyone had kind of like went off in different directions at that point. So the programmes were scanned for the book in 2018, a large, like we had a fundraising campaign for the book as well, and we had a, you know, very expensive, large flatbed scanners of these big programmes. And lots of people like kept them as well in their cupboards, and, you know, lots of people have said to us that, you know, brought them along and showed them to us. It's not the moment. I've been in discussion with a few universities and with the BFI archive about the SCALA archive. So I am still using them at the moment because we scan the fronts but the reason why we didn't put the backs into the book was that we couldn't clear all of the writing. Much of the writing was from Time Out, City Limits, and I didn't want like Jeff Andrew beating me up about the fact that we hadn't cleared the rights to one of his film reviews or whatever it was.
Also because the text is about the size of a Gideon Bible. It's like you'd need to read an electron microscope to read that stuff, wouldn't you, really?
Yeah, I was looking at the book the other day. It's fabulous. If you can buy a copy, it is just one of the most wonderful objects. But I was going, this is where I realise how old I am. I really need not just my reading glasses, but a magnifying glass for some of it, you know, because it's... Yeah.
But I think the intention will be ultimately to put them into some kind of archive preservation status. Yeah.
Yep. Gentleman here.
Hello, thank you. I was really struck by the scenes in the movie about the film, the use of film and catching fire in the projector and things like that. And I was just wondering if there's a different, you know, if you can say something about the difference for art house cinema today between digital and film. I remember my experiences. I'm not a Londoner, but I grew up in Birmingham, and my art cinema was the Triangle, and I remember they only had one projector. So to change the reels, a guy had to come out with a tea trolley to you know, and there was a certain culture element of that which seems to have been lost. Can you say anything about that?
I'll just start briefly, being the person. So, like every Thursday, this massive van from the Perivale, from the warehouse, would come with our week's supply of films, and you probably know that a 35mm reel is like this big and that thick, and there's 5 of them. It's 20 minutes on a reel, and the SCALA, and the word SCALA means staircase, and we had over 100 stairs in the and no lift in the King's Cross SCALA, and the projectionist would have to carry these all the way up the stairs to the top of the building, make up the prints. So often, you know, as we described in the film, the reels might be in the wrong order, the perforations, the sprocket holes might be like ripped and torn, and it was precarious. But also, I think the thing that we forget now, we're maybe a little bit used to seeing, you know, kind of scratchy looking archive film as a sort of aesthetic that filmmakers use. But the thing that we really forget is how terrible the sound was on 16mm and 35mm prints, particularly in cinemas like the SCALA that had a sound system that was called improved double mono. And so we had this kind of like sort of like series of speakers above. But, you know, the difference now is immense because, you know, you had all of this, you know, kind of breakdown, and then you'd have the slow hand clap of the audience who didn't seem to know that the projectionist couldn't hear them because the projection booth is soundproofed. You know, the fires on screen, the scratches, the tram lines, the faded prints, the magenta, pink prints, and all of that kind of like interesting thing, which we do romanticize now. I worked in distribution through the moment of digitisation when the BFI was pouring, well, actually the Film Council was pouring enormous amounts of money, forcing the industry into digital projection, really before filmmaking was ready to go that way. I remember going to sort of a test screening and there was a kind of a scene of nature, and the grass was emerald, just this block of emerald green. You couldn't see the leaves of the grass, you couldn't see any differentiation. And then there was another scene that was like Whoopi Goldberg's face. Can you imagine what the early like digital cinema did to a black woman's face? It was just, there was nothing there. She had no features, it was nothing. It was absolutely appalling. It was awful. And I still maintain that the light through 35mm, particularly if anybody ever went to a cinema that projected through carbon arc projectors, it was a very warm light. The quality of light is different. You can still see this in cinemas. The National Film Theatre and various other cinemas do keep up with 35mm projection. But maybe Ali can describe what it's like to watch a digital copy of our film, for example, in the cinema.
You mean crystal clear and beautiful? I just very quickly and tangentially on the subject of carrying those reels up endless flights of marble stairs without a lift involved. Our lovely usher Vic, who you've seen in the film, says that her favourite film to carry was called Dick, which was a short of just a procession of penises, and she said that was the smallest reel.
And we're actually showing Dick in the BFI South Bank SCALA season in January. I'm going to introduce a really rare screening of Looking for Mr. Goodbar, which you'll have seen referenced in the documentary as the man expired during the screening. Joanne Seller had to drag him out, but we're showing that in a double bill with the short film Dick. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes, back there. Thank you.
Hi. When you were assembling the clips and the interviews, were there any bits that you thought, no, we can't use that, that's just too strong? I mean, for example, the bits from Cafe Flesh and Thundercrack were pretty innocuous, really, compared to what's in there. But was there any self-censorship there?
There was some, well, it's less that, actually. I mean, I think when you start off to make a film about the SCALA, and it's a certificate 18, you just think anything goes, really, we don't care. It's more to do with the kind of stories that we used, and some of which we left out. There's a story about Shane MacGowan urinating on the audience during a screening during a Roger Corman season, and obviously Shane was extremely ill while we were making this film, and obviously he's now incredibly sadly passed away. And it felt like punching down in a way, so we didn't use it. But I think I'll leave Jane to talk about one particular film that begins with the letter T.
Well, actually, no, before we get to Thundercrack, you're right about Cafe Flesh, and actually I had a no gynecology rule for the film. I didn't want to see big gaping open fannies that you get in Cafe Flesh. I just didn't want our audience to kind of like sit through that. If they want to see Cafe Flesh, you can find Cafe Flesh. But
actually, that's true. And when we have clips of Russ Meyer, we're not sort of using clips like sort of Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens, you know.
Yeah, so that's a really good observation. Yeah. Good point. Yeah, there was some self-censorship. However, we did very much want to have an 18 certificate film, because I just thought you can't make a 15 cert about SCALA, can you? And also, by the time we'd compiled the film, and we had some really lovely stories, like Mark Moore's story about going aged 14 or 15, spending his dinner money on going to the movies, and about bunking in underage. And you know, we all many of us had those kind of stories, that we were excited to go to the SCALA because we were not 18, and we were excited to have a cigarette in the cinema because we weren't supposed to smoke in the cinema, all that sort of stuff. So as we know, it's incredibly hard to get an 18 cert in this country. Like Ben Wheatley and Edgar Wright have studied the BBFC rule book to within an inch of its life to work out how to get an 18. And we did it by putting in 1 second of Thundercrack. And it was very judiciously chosen, that particular shot, I felt. There was much in Thundercrack that we could have, you know, and it was very tempting. But I just really liked that particular shot, and that got us our 18. And my only regret about the 18, like, so when we were down in Brighton at the Duke of York showing the film as part of Cine City, I was sort of, somebody came with their daughter who was, I don't know, 14 or 15. And the management of the Duke of York already told me that they would age challenge anybody who looked under 18. And I said, seriously? You know, but this is, you know, and they're like, no, we're very serious about this. We're not going to break the rules. We will age challenge anyone who looks under 18. So I turned to our friend's daughter and said, so tell them you're 18, when, you know. But yeah, no, we would like to start a campaign to get younger people bunking into 18 films. The other campaign we would like to start is for excellence in intermission and auditorium music. We turned up at a cinema which will remain nameless, Pitch House Central, yesterday, and to do this intro for our film. And I was actually shocked, and I said to Ali, what is that terrible music that was playing as we came in? And he said,
it's Howard Shaw's Lord of the Rings.
SCALA, seriously? I mean, you know, like, our projectionist show used to play Joy Division between, you know, all night, and oh my God, it was fantastic. The music here is great. We were sitting out in the foyer while the film was on, listening to Talking Heads, and I really just implore you, projectionist. I know this is hard, projectionist. It's just one more thing you have to do, but please, God, put great music on before and after the films.
I just want to say, actually, that was an extremely, thank you about it, that was a really, really good question, you know, because, I mean, there are certain things that we didn't show that the SCALA showed, because sensibilities have changed in certain ways. You know, you're absolutely right. You know, certain things have the kind of carapace of, or kind of pattern of kind of irony since, you know, especially during the kind of late, you know, mid to late 90s, which the SCALA showed. And, you know, I think the difference between the SCALA and the kind of mid to late 90s is that the SCALA showed things in a very unself-conscious way. There was no kind of sort of postmodern ribbons and bows about this. You know, it wasn't kind of counterculture coiffed, you know. It was very organic. And so that question really interests me about sort of things that we actually, no, it wasn't just a case of, oh, anything goes. And it especially wasn't the case of anything goes when we were making this film, because we did have certain political reservations. You're absolutely right. It's a really good question, actually.
When I started work at the SCALA, I said to the general manager, John Hopper, is there anything you wouldn't show? He said, yes, absolutely. I would never show Crocodile Dundee.
I think
One
we may be
quick-
running out of time, but one more question.
Very
yes,
quickly,
this
yeah.
gentleman here. Wait. Microphone coming your way.
Well, perhaps it's appropriate that this is the last question. I just wanted to thank you all for all the enormous work that you've done. From the age of 17 in 1988 until 1992, I was going there I was going to your cinema every 3 or 4 weeks. I have a lot of formative memories there, and it really was an education in cinema. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. But the question I wanted to ask you was actually about the timetable, because I've actually still got some in the bottom of some of my drawers home, some of the timetables. But I've always wondered. Have you put some time or effort into, or thought about putting some time and effort into cataloguing what films were on what day at what time? Because I've got a lot of memories of going. I'm not sure if some of those memories are real or if they're sort of
Buy
Philip
my
K.
book,
Dick
mate.
type
Buy my
memories.
book.
Yeah,
It's
buy
all
Oh,
in
it's in the book?
and it's got an index, yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
I did it the other day. I kind of was like, hang on a minute, why didn't I know about this? Oh, I was away then, and I could look up, because every month Jane has put the programme
Awesome.
up
Yeah, I'll have a look.
and the date and what was going on.
Fabpress.com.
It is fantastic. You will not be able to sit and read it anywhere than at a big table because it's so heavy.
Sounds great.
But it is a fabulous book, and it's a great documentary, and I'm so pleased the Gardens had it, and thank you very much. I think
And you've been a great audience. Fabulous.
Great
Best
questions.
yet.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.